continue to take our clues from the Old Testament with regard to our attitude towards wealth, how we think about our resources and our wealth. And we move on from the promises made to Abram to now when this small band that came out of the land of Haran, this land from which Abram is called to leave the place of his family and to go to a place that the Lord is showing him. And he makes these promises. Well, now that promise is being fulfilled, that Abram would be the father of a great nation. That he's going to be the father of a great nation. Because we find ourselves here in the midst of the Exodus in the book of Leviticus. These are the commands that the Lord gives Israel, now this great family of Abram, who are now prepared to enter into the promised land, the land that the Lord has promised long ago to Abram and his family. And so it says this about the year of Jubilee. The year of Jubilee. The land must not be sold permanently, because the land is mine. Listen carefully to that. Read it again. Listen carefully again to that line. The land must not be sold permanently, because the land is mine, and you reside in my land as foreigners and strangers. Throughout the land that you hold as a possession, you must provide for the redemption of the land. If one of your fellow Israelites becomes poor and sells some of their property, their nearest relative is to come and redeem what they have sold. If, however, there is no one to redeem it for them, but later on they prosper and acquire sufficient means to redeem it themselves, they are to determine the value for the years since they sold it and refund the balance to the one to whom they sold it. They can then go back to their own property. But if they do not acquire the means to repay, what was sold will remain in the possession of the buyer until the year of Jubilee. It'll be returned in the Jubilee, and they can then go back to their property. Anyone who sells a house in a walled city retains the right of redemption a full year after its sale. During that time, the seller may redeem it. If it is not redeemed before a full year has passed, the house in the walled city shall belong permanently to the buyer and the buyer's descendants. It is not to be returned in the Jubilee. But houses in the villages without walls around them are to be considered as belonging to the open country. They can be redeemed, and they are to be returned in the Jubilee. The Levites always have the right to redeem their houses in the Levitical towns which they possess. So the property of the Levites is redeemable, that is, a house sold in any town they hold, and is to be returned in the Jubilee, because the houses in the towns of the Levites are their property among the Israelites. But the pasture land belonging to their towns must not be sold. It is their permanent possession. If any of your fellow Israelites becomes poor and are unable to support themselves among you, help them as you would a foreigner and stranger, so that they can continue to live among you. Do not take interest or any profit from them, but fear your God, so that you may continue to live, so that they may continue to live among you. You must not lend them money at interest or sell them food at a profit. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt to give you the land of Canaan and to be your God. Lord God, we ask that you would speak with clarity now. May the words of my mouth, may the meditation and reflection of our hearts and minds be acceptable to you as we seek to be faithful, as we seek to do your will here on earth as it is in heaven. In the name of Jesus, amen. So we continue thinking about why money matters, and part of the intention is doing this little short series in conjunction with Financial Peace University, a course that is intended to help us to reflect on the proper view of our wealth and our resources, how to be good stewards. Remember last week we started talking about this topic by saying that the groundwork that is laid by Scripture for our understanding of wealth and resources is the word stewardship. We go back to the beginning to get an insight into God's expectation of humankind with regard to this incredibly diverse, incredibly wealthy, blessed world, the creation in which He has placed humankind. And stewardship, being caretakers, is at the heart of our purpose as God calls us. And that purpose of stewardship is one that is governed by the command to be faithfully obedient. Not to be successful, but to be faithfully obedient. We continue to look to Israel for clues. We continue to look to the Old Testament for clues and insight as to what is a responsible, faithful way for us as Jesus followers to think about and to treat our wealth and our resources. And so we're thinking here about Israel's attitude toward wealth. And one of those first things to make note of, and we won't dwell on this long because we just talked about it with the children, but that the promise to Abraham, that threefold promise to Abraham, what I want you to make note of is that threefold promise is full and rich. It includes the blessing of land. You have to think of it this way, that the call of Abram and the promises made to Abram is a call, and are promises that are directed toward, are moving toward the new creation. You have to think of Abram as being now a new Adam, who's being promised a new creation, a new Eden. And indeed, when we get to the point of Israel's story as they are getting ready to head into the Promised Land, they are depicted themselves. In fact, Israel is described as the Son of God, Adam, the new Adam, who is now going into the new garden of promise and of fullness, of plenty. How did the Israelites describe this land that is promised to the family of Abram? It's a land flowing with milk and honey. That is, it is a land that has all that we need. Land, the blessing of the land, the prosperity of the land, the shalom of the land, is part and parcel of what it means to be the people of God. It is fully a part of what God is promising Abram when He says, I'm going to make your name great. That is, people will know you and remember you for years into the future because of your relationship with me. And you're going to be the father of a great nation that will inhabit this place that you see now as you look out at this land to which I brought you, the land of Canaan. Your people will fill this land and enjoy, prosper here, because this will be a land of holiness. This will be a land where my will is done. This will be a land that will be blessed by me because of my graciousness, not because of your success. And I'm going to, through you, bless all nations. Another way to say it is this, that Israel is always blessed in order to be a blessing. Israel is blessed in order to be a blessing. They are not blessed for their own sake. They're not blessed for self-aggrandizement. They don't seek blessing in a self-interested way. They are blessed to be a blessing. We address, in this context, we're addressing the health and wealth gospel. Okay? and in the West, and particularly in our consumerist culture here in America, the health and wealth gospel wreaks havoc on faithful disciples of Jesus and are faithfully following Jesus. David Jones, who is a frequent writer for the website The Gospel Coalition, and I would highly recommend The Gospel Coalition. Just Google it, put a bookmark on that website. It's an incredibly helpful website in providing commentary on our current cultural context from a biblical perspective. David Jones says this about the health and wealth gospel, and he is citing the great Charles Spurgeon, who was a preacher 100 years ago, more than that. More than a century ago, speaking to the then largest congregation in all of Christendom. So what David Jones has in mind is the incredible arenas that come, where people flock to see, somebody like a Joel Osteen or these other health and wealth preachers. And what he wants us to envision is a Charles Spurgeon who preached to the same kind of numbers more than a century ago. But here's what Spurgeon said: "I believe that it is anti-Christian and unholy for any Christian to live with the object of accumulating wealth. You will say, are we not to strive all that we can to get all the money we can? You may do so, and I cannot doubt but what, in so doing, you may do service to the cause of God." You may do service to the cause of God. You see, oftentimes, this is the rationale of the health and wealth gospel, that in pursuing wealth, you can do more good. Spurgeon says, "I cannot doubt but what in so doing you may do service to the cause of God. But what I said was that to live with the object of accumulating wealth, with that as your object, is anti-Christian." You see, the promises made to Abram are not promises that are intended to induce the pursuit of wealth. As we saw last week, what the promises to Abraham do, like last week, is to induce, is to promote, is to invite faithfulness. Abram is simply invited to believe and obey. And that is fleshed out all the more as we get to that story of Jubilee. And the incredible arrangement that the Lord, the countercultural arrangement that the Lord provides for Israel as they enter the land. Let's take just a moment here. Self-interest. Let's qualify this. And I want to qualify it because I want you to understand clearly why we're doing the Financial Peace University. Go ahead and play that clip, Martin, and then I'll make a few more comments. So here's a little taste of what you'll see and experience with Financial Peace University. Maybe. Maybe not. Just double click the file. Okay. Just double click the file. Just double click it and it'll play. There we go.
What would happen if the people of God started handling money God's ways? You work too hard to get to the end of your life and have nothing to show for it.
This is my family's legacy that I'm talking about here. I've got to have a plan and be focused.
That knowledge that you pass down to your kids, that is how you change a family tree.
You change your life when you get sick and tired of being sick and tired. And you have that moment where you say, I've had it. I'm not going to live like this anymore.
So how is, I'll put the question this way, how is David Ramsey different from the health and wealth gospel preachers? This is the crux of the issue. And the crux of the issue is this: David Ramsey is not interested in suggesting that our purpose as followers of Jesus is to get blessed, to name it and claim it. His purpose as a teacher and as a leader is to say we have fallen into idolatrous patterns of consuming beyond our means, of consuming as the ultimate good. That is, as thinking, believing the lie of our culture that the more that we buy and acquire, even if it means being bought on credit, the happier we're going to be. And the reality of indebtedness on the part of Christians is evidence that Christians have bought this lie. And believe me, Tammy and I have struggled with this. This is not somebody who standing up here accusing others or pointing the finger without first pointing at myself. It is part of the idolatry of our age to suggest that we ought to pursue material success and happiness by acquiring things at the expense of our family's health, at the expense of our faithfulness to the Lord. And so we qualify this idea of self-interest. Are we self-interested when we say, I want to be faithful in planning financially? Yes. I want to be faithful as a steward of what the Lord has given me. I want to plan for retirement. That is a self-interest, but a self-interest that is subjugated, that is governed by the larger purposes of God. And those larger purposes of God are faithfulness in serving His cause, being a blessing to the nations, as we talked about with the children. Here's how John Piper puts it as he addresses the health and wealth gospel that places the pursuit of wealth as a primary goal, as a pursuit in itself worthy. John Piper says, if God's love for His children is to be measured by our health, wealth, and comfort in this life, then God hated the Apostle Paul. God hated Mother Teresa. God hated countless faithful Christians from the very earliest time of the history of the church, who gave of themselves sacrificially for the cause of the kingdom. Make no mistake that it is not a measure of our faithfulness to be able to check off boxes. I am comfortable, I have material wealth, I have good physical health. Those are not indicators that we are blessed. And again, it's not, it isn't trying to play both sides of the coin to say that we don't desire those things. Indeed, Israel is said, here lays the land before you that is going to be a land of blessing. And yet, at the same time, it is to be a land of blessing, not just for yourself. It is not about what you can accumulate, but it is about the community. The picture that we have of the land of Israel is a picture that says all will have what is needed. We come back to this, the question that I raised last week. Is Jesus a capitalist? Or is Jesus against capitalism? Jesus is not a capitalist, nor is He a communist. Jesus has no interest in ideologies, in philosophies of this age. And that capitalism is not written in Scripture, and neither is communism. They are political economic theories, ideologies. They're philosophies, they're ideas that people have put together to justify certain behaviors and actions. We, as followers of Jesus, follow not a theory, not a system of beliefs, not an economic system, a political system. We follow a person. We follow a person who invites us into relationship. We follow a God who says, I'm going to walk with you, and you walk with me as sojourners and strangers. We worship a God who says, I expect of you nothing less than you be like me in the ways that you treat others. And that's why in the year of Jubilee you have this radical, countercultural, for the people of, for the time of Israel's life, in the culture of that time, it was countercultural. It ran completely against the grain when Yahweh says in the 50th year, in the year of Jubilee, the debts are canceled. That didn't happen in any of the other nations in which Israel lived, around which Israel lived. That it makes no sense you cancel debt. It makes no sense that you sell only at a price that is reasonable with regard to the coming of the year of Jubilee. But that's what Yahweh's expectation is of his people. Jubilee is a prime marker and an indicator about God's purposes for our understanding of wealth and resources. Here's why the Jubilee is put forward by God as to be as a central practice. Jubilee begins on the Day of Atonement. It's about forgiveness. It's about grace. Jubilee is to ensure that every Israelite is able to enjoy the safety, security, prosperity of the land. That all will participate in the shalom of the land of Israel. And that there would be none who are left out. Now here's what Jubilee is not. Jubilee is not a political economic theory. It's not a political economic theory to be applied to nation states today. What it is it is a guideline for Christians as we engage in life with one another and with our culture. It would be faithful of a Christian business person to put to work the principles of Jubilee. It would be unfaithful for us to expect our government to enact laws that prescribed Jubilee. Do you get me? It would be faithful of us, each one of us, to practice Jubilee as it relates to our family of God members and our neighbors. This practice of Jubilee ought to shape the way that we think about our wealth and our resources. That we always have to qualify self-interest. This would be my beef with Dave Ramsey, that every time he uses that language of your money, if it's not qualified, it becomes confusing with regard to our faithfulness as a disciple. God's money given to us to steward. Your land, Yahweh, that you've given us Israelites to steward. Here is why the year of Jubilee is crucial. Because it is a way of remembering that you were slaves in Egypt, and from you I have called you. One last comment here about the isms. There are lots of isms, okay? Capitalism, Marxism, communism, fascism, racism. All of those isms are ideas, and what lay behind them is idolatry, is the desire to take some part of the creation and suggest that this part of the creation can do what only God can do. That this part of the creation can provide what only a relationship with the living God in Jesus Christ can accomplish. To think that capital, wealth, can accomplish what we long for in terms of holiness and health, happiness, a future in which we can trust, and a future beyond our earning days and our retirement days, and indeed the grave. And that goes for any ism. John Calvin says it, for what is idolatry if not this, to worship the gifts in place of the giver himself? Indeed, indeed, what God has given us as we look about, as we reach for our wallets or pocketbooks, as we consider our homes, the cars that we drive, the clothes that are on our back, all are gifts. And yet none of these gifts, no accumulation of wealth, no accumulation of power, no accumulation of prestige, no position with a corporation, no success as an athlete can possibly garner us the salvation, the meaningful life for which we long. It is only a relationship with the God who lays behind, the God who is indeed the giver. And so that announcement of Jubilee is an announcement of extreme grace in action. This is grace at the highest, operating at the highest level. For a person to say to someone who had to sell their property in order to save their family, 20 years later to say to that person, to that family, here it is. You receive it back interest-free, no more payments required, nothing required. I give it back to you as a gift. Why? Because that's how God has treated me. It's not mine to begin with. It's not your land. Remember how that passage started out. This is not your land. But it's a land that is given, and that extends to everything that we have. The breath that we take comes as a gift from the Creator. Indeed, Jesus at the start of his ministry in Luke's Gospel says that the year of Jubilee has arrived. Go back to Luke chapter 4, and Jesus says, I have come to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And that was the prophetic phrase, that's from Isaiah's prophecy. That's the prophetic phrase in the prophets for the year of Jubilee, the year of the Lord's favor. And Jesus says, with me, it's arrived. And coextensively, by extension, as followers of Jesus, as people who want to be disciples of Jesus, who want to be like Jesus, think like Jesus, act like Jesus, Jubilee continues to arrive, inasmuch as we are faithful as stewards. May God, by the power of His Spirit, remind us of grace and gift, and empower us to be so gracious and giving. Let's pray. Holy God.